Okay, so that's the 10 minutes up. Are we recording now? Okay, so thank you very much for your patience there. We now have resolved the technical hitch with our audio-visual. Welcome to the first meeting of the Audit Committee of this municipal cycle and of this municipal year. My name is Andrew Garrett. I'm the chair of the committee. We have here other members of the committee who are councillors and members of staff who will be responding to questions and explaining these what appear very technical papers but are extraordinarily important papers for us. Just a note on fire procedure. All of those in this room are aware of the fire procedure, I'm sure. The planned fire drill has already happened today. We have heard the test of the fire alarm. So if you do hear the alarm, it is not drill. In any case, we would be leaving in the usual way. There are three of our colleagues who are not here today. Unfortunately, we're not able to check whether they have already sent their apologies, so we will assume that they have sent apologies for this meeting until proved otherwise. But otherwise, we are quorate and able to go. The first item on our agenda is to confirm as a true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of March 2021. I note that no member of this committee was either a member or present at that meeting at that time. So I think we will just have to accept that the minutes are a true record of that meeting, unless any colleague has reason to believe otherwise.
We've not had them challenged anywhere else.
So we have not had them challenged anywhere else. So I will go ahead and sign them. Bear with me for a moment. Right, the next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Does any colleague have an interest to declare? I'll take that as no, so we'll move on. Public question time. Do we have any questions submitted to us? There is no one present in the public gallery, so nothing has otherwise been sent to us, so we can move on from that. Now, given that we've had a bit of a hitch in the timings, and I know there are a couple of colleagues who would benefit from being away as soon as possible, particularly our colleague here from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service. I'm going, if colleagues are happy with me to do this, to vary the order of the agenda. What I shall do is bring up as our next item what would be otherwise item 10, the report of the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service annual statement of assurance. And I will move down item 5, which is the procurement activity report, till what would that be, at item 10. So if colleagues are okay with that, it will allow people to get away to other meetings that they have to service. We have here Mr. Lucy of Fire and Rescue Service. You have the report, which is at pages 127 to 154 of your agenda pack. Mr. Lucy, is there anything you want to briefly say to introduce this report, and then I'll move to questions and comments upon that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, well, certainly in terms of the report, so I'm representing today our new Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Shantha Dickinson, who has replaced Steve Apter, as you will all know, and our Deputy Chief is attending our own Standards and Governance Committee with Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority on the mainland today, but because of the retrospective nature of this report, I'm attending in her place. I think just to give a really brief summary of the report for the benefit of those in attendance today, I think we cover off within the report in some detail the challenges that the year 2020 to 21 presented us as a service, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic, as it has been for all organisations and all services. I think we were regarded as performing well in that arena, and certainly doing things very differently as a fire and rescue service to assist our communities and assist the benefits of our communities. And that's across the board, from our frontline staff to also the governance and the chairing of local resilience forums, strategic and tactical coordinating groups for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So a challenging year, but one that I think we performed well at.
Thank you, Mr. Lucy. Certainly the way the report reads, that is how it comes across. Obviously, we may have some questions to probe on that. So I'll open it up to questions. I think the report is clearly satisfied, colleagues, with that. Councillor Stevens.
Noting that most services are under financial pressure, and I believe the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service are running, how can I say, with a deficit or with an overspend at this moment. How do you see us making up that deficit? And also, do you foresee that with pay claims, etc., and the deficit and things going moving into the future of 2021, that there will be an increase in our precept on the Isle of Wight?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And if I may, yeah, it's a good question, and a good question in the sense that I'm not going to be able to completely answer wholeheartedly your question, as I think you probably understand. But I think within the report, we also refer to the financial sort of pressures that COVID has brought us as a service, and I think we major on the fact that there's some definite uncertainty about the future and how we will fare and what the opportunities are for us in the future as fire and rescue services. And I think that it's twofold, in the sense that our funding is probably uncertain, but also as are the duties of the fire and rescue services moving forward. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic was a really good example of how we've, as I said at the start here, work very differently as fire and rescue services, particularly supporting those within our community, particularly supporting the vulnerable. And I think there's work to be done there as fire and rescue services moving forward, along with national employers and their representative bodies across the nation, to sort of look at the role of a firefighter and how that may develop, and the role of the fire and rescue services moving forward. In terms of the precept, as I said at the start, Councillor, I'm afraid that I can't answer that myself here today, but I'm certainly willing to come back to you with a view from Shamfa and our senior team as to the likelihood of that. But certainly at this stage, the medium to long-term financial planning is at the forefront of the executive group, and I know it's something they're considering as a matter of importance.
Councillor Stevens. You wanted to follow up?
I just want to make sure that we amalgamated with Hampshire a little while ago, and during that the run-up to that, I'd asked various questions with regards to the state of our real estate, if you like, the state of our buildings, and should we lease the properties or not? Anyway, cut long story short, I was given the assurance that the buildings would be brought up to a better standard, a more usable standard. I've spoken with the chief of fire, and he said yes, and I believe they've issued a press release. I don't think it's hit the shores of the Isle of Wight. If it did, I didn't see too much written in the media. But I want the reassurance from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire that we are going to get those improvements undertaken. I want to see them completed, but I'd also like to see a timescale. And so, if you can't answer the question, could you take that message back? I think that's what we need on the Isle of Wight, is to make sure that all our fire stations, and indeed the equipment our firefighters use, is up to standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just to respond on that, I can give some assurances that work has already started across some of the estates, and certainly there is a plan in place to do that under the service improvement plan for all estates across Hampshire and Isle of Wight. Year one of that plan is about making the Isle of Wight stock, so the estates within the Isle of Wight area, safe and legally compliant. And so there's some work already underway, and very briefly, just to dip into the detail, things like exhaust ventilation systems in our appliance bays because of the engines of the appliances running and the fumes around that. New appliance bay doors have been put in at Newport at the workshops, and also asbestos walls have been removed, and works have started on Shanklin with new windows, and we've got some roofing works again starting slightly later this year. So that's starting that improvement plan, and is good progress. It's probably not, in all honesty, as quickly as our people would like across the Isle of Wight, and we absolutely understand that. But as I say, year one is about making the estates safe and legally compliant, and then that will roll on through that programme to improve them over a number of years. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Obviously, we are in a new time with the new combined fire authority. And I believe that you are the representative on that, are you, Councillor Stevens? So you'll be in a strong position to.
Chairman, it's fallen to me to take on that role, yes.
How noble of you, Councillor Stevens. I'm going to just ask a question myself, if I may, or highlight a point. So, on page 11 of the report, page 139 of the pack, there's a reference to safe and well visits primarily being delivered to individuals who have been referred to yourselves by Partners in Health. I just wondered how the data protection aspects of those were managed. Are you able to answer that or take that away as a question? Because obviously we can't just share data as services just because we feel it will be for the good of somebody, that there must be a legal ground to allow that data to be shared. And I just would like an assurance that is considered in these.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, just to try and give some assurances around that, data sharing agreements have been in place throughout the strategic partnership that our two services have had, so Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, when the Isle of Wight sat under the Isle of Wight Council, and then as part of the currently in place combined fire authorities, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority, data sharing agreements between our two legal departments have been sort of at the forefront of developing that work and ensuring adequate data sharing between the two. So that, I guess, to give those assurances, that's been a consideration throughout.
Councillor Lilly.
Thank you. Firstly, if we can actually minute thanks from this committee for not only this report but the work of our firemen and women throughout COVID, because I think for all the frontline services on the island, if it wasn't for their heroic commitment and work, many of our most vulnerable residents would not have had the support that they needed. So thank you. And I think we often forget that our firemen and women are very much doing a lot of social care in the way that they work. I think we know that of ambulance, of the NHS staff, the police, but actually often the fire service are doing this as well, and in fact in a lot of cases have a lot more contact through that. So if we can actually put a thank you. I do want to raise the issue about our people section, because the our people is obviously your staff team. How we've talked at previous meetings about the increase of support around mental health. That has come up in a number of reports over the years, and I know that you've actually done some amazing work getting many of your staff trained in mental health first aid, etc., which is very commendable. But the pandemic was particularly a difficult time, and particular people who are vulnerable to post-traumatic stress. The pandemic triggered a lot of, it was a traumatic trigger to a lot of people. How are your team wearing up through that? Have you, is recruitment still, is that a problem within that? And how, are you going to, your capacity of your team for the future coming out of COVID, and you could say the recovery is could be harder than the pandemic in lots of ways. So it's a people question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, and I think that there's probably a few elements in terms of the response to that question. I think we're pleased with where we are is the overall, but you rightly refer to COVID and the impacts that had on our workforce. I think one of the benefits, or certainly in the staff surveys that we've completed since COVID and the Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary's Fire and Rescue Services, has highlighted the way that we work with our staff through that period as a benefit and good practice. We took up at the outset a weekly Chief Fire Officers briefing, which was to all staff and really was because of the rapidly changing situation and the rapid impacts of COVID and changes to the way that we could or couldn't work in various circumstances. We were able to put in place a weekly staff forum, a weekly update from the Chief Fire Officer, which has continued to this day. It's now actually moved to fortnightly because the impacts aren't quite as severe at this stage, but it's something that we are going to continue for our teams moving forward over the years, because it was seen as something that was really good practice, and our staff and our teams really felt part of that bigger picture, understood where they sat within that whole response to the pandemic and the whole response as a fire and rescue service moving forward. So that was the first element. I think and you referred to it within your question there, we have some good work that goes on around mental health awareness, mental health first aid, and we use what we call TRIM counsellors, but traumatic incident management. And we've been able to offer that service out to all teams now across Hampshire and Isle of Wight as an opportunity to talk and an opportunity to discuss. And I think what COVID's presented us is some difficulties being able, or not being able rather, to be able to have those kind of toolbox talks, those hot debriefs that we're able to do from an incident perspective because of the impacts of COVID, ensuring that our teams have to then leave the station, go back to their homes and back to their families. And so that's caused us some challenges, but the TRIM counselling, the TRIM management within that has kind of stepped up there to ensure that those individuals they feel supported. They're offered that service to talk and discuss. So we have a 24-hour contact, then another contact within 72 hours, and then another contact within 2 weeks. So they're kind of given that support over set periods of time where they offer the opportunity to talk and discuss how they're feeling. And from that, we can then make referrals if it's felt necessary to do so. So that again, is another part and another benefit, I would suggest, of the Wight and certainly the combination of the two services. In terms of recruitment, pleased to announce that our latest recruits, a group of 16 across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and I think, and please don't quote me, but I think 3 of which were going to be utilised on the Isle of Wight. Recruitment took place on Friday, so a passing out parade on Friday last week. So really good to see. And I know we have more recruitment booked in the future going through this year, at least 1 or 2 courses of recruitment to keep up with that sort of churn of personnel. And then in terms of that sort of capacity of staff, I think that's probably where I reflected in my early answers. There's a certain element of the unknown as to what COVID has presented us with. There's obviously opportunities for us moving forward, but there's certainly an amount of unknown. I think that's about the role of the fire and rescue service. And there's more we can do in the community. I think we've done some really good work, as you referred to, particularly around some of the vulnerable, working with our partners in health and with the emergency response in ambulance. I think there's some good work we can do. Opportunities for us there. But certainly the capacity, I think, at this stage is unknown as to where we go as fire and rescue services. At this stage, we're good. And in terms of our responses, our availability has increased. A lot of our, as you all know, a lot of our on-call staff, our retained staff, their availability has improved because of COVID and an increase in working from home. that's been one of the benefits for us as a fire and rescue service. The availability of appliances has improved, and therefore our services and our response to the community has improved. Not always perfect, of course, but in the large, that's improved across the piece, which is pleasing. And then finally, to finish off, in terms of our transition, if you like, from response into recovery, and I think that it's always fluctuating, isn't it, at the moment? We're not quite sure where we're going. Hopefully we're moving nicely forward into that, firmly into that recovery period. But we've had a recovery coordinating group set up in service for a number of months now, managing that transition. Today's a really good example where we have almost a hybrid approach to the meeting, some present, some present on Teams, and that's something we're starting to progress and develop so that our teams on stations and working from home can do the same thing. So again, that recovery coordinating group is starting to support that and support our people in terms of that hybrid working.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm aware, of course, this is in a sense a historical document, so we don't want to probe you too much on what is going forwards, because that is now through the Combined Fire Authority and Councillor Stevens. But colleagues, any other questions before? Councillor Baker.
I showed my hand a little while ago, and I think the point has been to some extent covered in answers given, but I just wondered if from the pandemic, any positives have come out for the service. You've mentioned a couple of things actually already, but it was a more general question as to whether it's provided any learning experiences of things that could be done in a different way to benefit the service.
Yeah, again, good question. And I think there's probably, you're right, we've covered a few off for sure. The ability to work slightly differently, work effectively from home, as we've all, I'm sure council employees have done exactly the same and almost evidenced the fact that works for us as an organisation. There's been changes to the way that we train, the way that we develop and support our people, again, utilising a lot of digital and virtual support and platforms for that. Also, the way that our people have trained slightly differently on stations and at our workplaces. So definitely some benefits there. As I mentioned earlier, the availability of our teams has improved. Again, how that transpires as we move through the next 6, 12, 18 months and how we come out of COVID or stay in a flux around COVID, I think, again, it's a bit difficult to say, but certainly there's been some benefits there with the availability of our appliances. And then finally is probably the opportunities, as I said earlier, is the way that we've embedded ourselves in the community in a better way and a more supportive way. We've certainly embedded ourselves with our colleagues in the ambulance service, colleagues in health, and I think overall have shown ourselves to be supportive and supporters of the community. And I think they're the opportunities that we have as fire and rescue services currently and how we build on them. And I think that's the work that's ongoing, particularly around our partners in health and within that sort of medical response, supporting those services. I think there's opportunities there. And again, discussions are ongoing, but I think that's the opportunities and the benefits, I think, in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If I may then, I'll draw this item to a close. You'll note from the papers that the paper is here to provide assurance on the financial governance and operational matters. I don't detect anything from the questions that we've asked that raises any particular concerns. Obviously, you've heard the comments and questions, and that those can be taken back if need be. Obviously, it's now the Combined Fire Authority who takes things forward from now on. Noting first, of course, what Councillor Lilly says, that we would minute, of course, our immense gratitude and appreciation to the whole service, every person involved in the service on the operational, and I'd also stress the administration side of things. It's often overlooked that to be operationally successful, you do need administrative success as well. People have worked tirelessly throughout the last year to deliver an extraordinarily important service. So with that noted as a minute, did you wish to add something to that, Councillor?
I just wish to propose that we approve the report.
Which I was going to do from the chair, but you have, and I will second you then on that, as you have done so. Colleagues, is the report approved, if you'd show your hands? Councillors Bacon and Stevens, do you wish to approve? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucy. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and safe journey back or to wherever you're next going. And you may leave us, but of course, you're welcome to stay if you wish. So few decide to stay when they could go. So the next item, sorry, Councillor. Oh, indeed. So we'll return to our agenda. At this point, we now will take item 4, which is the reports of the external auditor, Ernst & Young, pages 5 to 46 of your agenda pack. I understand that they are on.
Yes, we have Jason Jones and Helen Thompson. Helen?
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chairman.
We will need,
Morning,
I think
Chairman.
we need to unmute from our end.
Shall I just check that you can hear me?
I can hear you certainly.
Excellent. I've got
So-
a little bit of feedback, Chairman, but we'll hopefully it'll be okay.
It may be because I had my mic on at the time, but let's hope that you'll be fine. So we have your report, of course. Just briefly, is there anything you would want to highlight to us before we get into asking questions of you and then providing comment?
Chairman, yes, if we could just briefly introduce the report. We're not going to do it in detail, but I think as a starting point, obviously a new committee. My name is Helen Thompson. I'm the associate partner and I'm responsible for the overall oversight and delivery of the audit. It's me who signs the auditor's report on the financial statements, and I'm joined by Jason, who is the manager for the audit, who carries out the day-to-day supervision and delivery. This is our full audit planning report. We did present an outline plan at the March meeting, and I think I would note, Chairman, that this is later than we would ordinarily present, which is in part due to the knock-on impact from change deadlines in 2019-20, and has reflected in terms of the timing of completing work for the 2021 audit. So we would ordinarily try and produce this in advance of the year end. It's summarising the key risks we've identified. So we are only pointing out the most significant risks to the audit. We're not covering, we're not covering all of the work that we do. The report would be substantially longer if we did so. And we obviously carry out sufficient work on all aspects of the financial statements to ensure there's evidence to support the values reported in the accounts. The risks are set out in summary on pages 9 and 10 of your pack, and then in more detail from page 15. I suppose my overall summary is there's no significant change to the risks from last year, although there has been some refocusing of the risk, and there is one new risk, which Jason will just take you through very briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. Thanks, Chair. Chair, if members could turn to page 9 of our report. The first risk we have there is the misstatements due to fraud or error, which is the generic risk of management override that we recognize on every audit. And members that have been on this committee before will recognize this risk from previous years. The concept there is that no matter how good your control environment may be, management can circumvent the controls because they are the ones who implement those controls. Therefore, we undertake a program of work on all of our audits to ensure that this is not occurring. It's not unique to the Isle of Wight Council. The next one down is the improper recognition of revenue and expenditure recognition. With the pressures on finances as they are, there is an incentive to recognize more revenue or less expenditure to improve the council's financial position. So we again undertake a program of work to ensure that this is not occurring at the council, and this isn't a change from the prior year. It's a risk that we've carried forward, and we recognize it each year. Then just a slight change from our outline plan that we presented to the March committee. For the next one down is the evaluation of investment properties and other land and buildings valued at existing use value. So in our outline plan, we had the investment properties as a significant risk in terms of valuation because of the fluctuations in the market and how these impact the valuations. So we've extended this also to the other land and buildings that are valued at existing use value, as the balance is or was material in 1920, and we expect it to be material again in 2021. So this we've also upgraded to significant risk, similar to the one for investment properties. So we've separated those two out from other land and buildings that are valued at depreciated replacement cost, Chair, because the properties valued at using the DRC method, these are not significantly impacted by market fluctuation, so therefore a bit less risky, but it's still a material balance in the accounts and subject to estimation, assumptions, and judgments. So we recognize this as a high inherent risk. The next two, PFI and pension liabilities, those are the same as in previous years, which we've carried forward. And if members could just turn to page 10, which is the next risk on COVID-19 related grant income. This one is new for the current year. It wasn't in our outline plan previously. And this is due to the significant level of grants received by the council in relation to COVID-19. And all of those grants with varying terms and conditions, which comes with different accounting requirements. And we've recognized here the increased risk of incorrectly accounting for those grants, because there's different accounting treatments, Chair, depending on whether the council is seen to be a principal or an agent in relation to the grants. And the distinction there being, if the council is seen to be an agent, it's just pass-through grants, so it doesn't eat your income and expenditure. So with the increased level of grants being received, there is a increased risk of the incorrect accounting treatment. And then last but not least is going concern. Some members may recall we had an increased focus in this area last year, and it's still an area of focus for us, especially in the current environment. So in terms of the work we will perform, we will look at management's going concern assessment and looking at the information that underpins that assessment, things like the cash flow forecasting, the MTFS, the budgets, and making sure that the disclosures in the accounts are sufficient and adequate. The detailed program of work that we'll undertake for all of those risks that I've just read through, Chair, is contained in section 2. That's pretty much all I was going to say, Chair, but happy to take any questions or hand back to Helen.
So if I just pick up, Jason, and then Chairman, if we could take questions on at the end. This next section of the report, or the next substantial section of the report, relates to our value for money assessment. At the previous committee, and I appreciate that there's been a significant change in membership of the committee since then, we provided a briefing on how the VFM approach has changed for 2021 in response to the NAO's updated Code of Audit Practice. And we'd be happy to make that report available to members should you find that of interest. In summary, we're now required to undertake a more detailed risk assessment against the 3 reporting criteria, which is set out on page 24. Each of those criteria have a number of sub-criteria. We're very much still focusing on proper arrangements, so we're not looking at outcomes. We don't make an assessment as to whether or not you are giving value for money. We are looking at whether you have the right arrangements in place to deliver value for money. And we report by exception if we conclude that those arrangements are not sufficiently robust or if they are not in place. So this detailed risk assessment is carried out at the planning stage of the audit, and then we only carry out additional work if that assessment identified an area of potential weakness, for example, a gap in those proper arrangements. I'm pleased to say that we've completed our risk assessment for this year, and we've concluded that we don't need to carry out that additional work. And this is in contrast to the last audit, where we did carry out more detailed work around financial planning, monitoring and reporting. We will update that risk assessment, but we expect to conclude that there will be no matters to report. And the second key change arising from the NAO's new code is that rather than providing an annual audit letter, there is now a document called the Auditor's Annual Report, and that will include a commentary against those arrangements. So there will be more detail against each of that we will present to the committee in due course. The final couple of points I wanted to make, and it may sort of be part of the questions there, the page 41 1 sets out the fees associated with the audit. At previous committees and in discussions with the Director of Finance, we've talked about the challenges within the public sector audit market and the pressure that there has been on fees as a consequence of the increase of regulators' focus on the work of auditors. We've had helpful discussions with Director of Finance who agrees the principles, and in relation to the fees that are set out in page 41, the additional fees for 2019-20 have been agreed by the Council, but are still in the process for approval with public sector audit appointments. The rebasing of the scale fee, which is set out in those pages, again, subject to approval by public sector audit appointments, which I might abbreviate to PSAA. We will obviously update the committee with the agreed outcome in due course, but PSAA are quite slow in providing finalisation of their views. The last thing I just wanted to say in terms of the timetable for the audit is due to start on the financial statements next week. We aim to have it substantially completed by the end of September and reporting to the committee, but obviously until we get into the audit, we don't know quite what we're going to find. Chairman, I appreciate that's probably been a slightly longer introduction, but I hope that has been helpful and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that introduction, and certainly given that this is a committee with largely new membership, it is always helpful to have that extra background. I can assure you that we will be looking at the way in which we all make sure that we're appropriately skilled up and serviced to respond to these matters. So we'll be looking at that over the next 2 or 3 months. Colleagues, this is obviously a report on work that's going to be done by external auditors. It naturally will throw out questions about what the council does, but it may be more appropriate to make sure the questions are focused on supporting the external auditors in the work that they're going to be doing, and any other questions about the council's work we can certainly raise, but we may want to find other avenues in which to do that. But with that in mind, Councillor Lilly, I think you have a question.
My question really is, during the audit, are we, what exactly are you going to do regarding debt and borrowings? Because that's a fundamental area of whether this council is solvent or not, right? And obviously COVID really pushed our whole financial plans really in limbo, really. I mean, obviously there was a set from the previous administration, a financial, we're dealing with savings cuts side. Obviously COVID completely threw that out and side. So absolutely getting to grips with our debt and our borrowings, right, are extremely important. We also need to look at the impact of our disposable spend on interest, because obviously that's part of it. And I was also going to raise I suppose the evaluation of our overall financial stability, which is extremely important for us to going forward for the future, particularly in the concept of how we are looking coming out of COVID and the pandemic.
Thank you. Ms. Thompson, are you able to respond to those points?
Yes.
So if I start with my thinking, and then Jason can add in anything that I may have forgotten as we go through. In terms of debt and borrowing, I mean, as a starting point, we will obviously agree that the figures that are set out within the financial statements around debt and borrowing are accurate and agree back to third-party information. That's kind of the easy bit. In terms of the wider impact of that on the financial position, I suppose there's 2 areas of the work in which we would cover that off. Firstly, within the financial statements, as Jason mentioned, around going concern, that is probably the area of the work that is of most interest, because if I think back to 2018-19, so the last year in which we reported before the pandemic, the level of disclosure around going concern, basically for almost all local authorities, said we are a going concern. Since then, there has been a new auditing standard and there has been the pandemic. And so a combination of those two things, we now ask the council to provide a much more extensive assessment of how they have come to that conclusion around going concern. Part of it is covered by the presumption that effectively all public sector bodies are a going concern unless they are told that they are not, which is usually by government. But what we're looking at is the level of disclosure, which sets out how the council has considered what level of cash it has, sort of liquid cash, liquid investments that they have access to, should there be an unexpected financial shock. What's the level of borrowing? How can that impact? How has that been taken into account into the medium and longer term financial plans? So it really comes through in terms of the work we do around the disclosure of that within the financial statements. The second side of it, to an extent, is also covered by value for money, our work on that, where one of the criteria is very much around financial sustainability. So if you look on page 24 of your papers, the sub-criteria for that is, how has the council ensured it's identified all the significant financial pressures? How does it plan to bridge funding gaps and identify achievable savings, etc.? So there are a number of areas in which we would pick that up. Ultimately, though, what I would say is that the decision about what to borrow and how much to borrow is obviously a council decision. So we will comment on from the proper arrangements and disclosures point of view, but the decision is not ours as an auditor. Is there anything, Jason, that you would want to add to that?
Chair, no, I think Helen covered all the aspects that I was thinking of, so the going concern and the value for money criteria, and then looking at the material accuracy of the account when it comes to borrowing and liabilities. So I think Helen's covered the things that I was going to discuss as well. Yeah.
Councillor Lilly, do you want to come back on that?
Thank you.
You're happy with the response you had?
I'm happy that it's been raised and that they are going to undertake that within the audit. So thank you.
So, Councillor Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. And that introduction is very useful as someone who's very new to audit. The question I'd like to ask relates to the new area of focus on page 10, which refers to the accounting for government funding. Now, in relation to a couple of the mentions I've seen elsewhere in the paper, which of course I can't find just at the moment, is there also work to be done in relation to how accounting procedures where the council has operated differently during COVID, where staff have been moved round and librarians have been delivering prescriptions and things like that? I'm just concerned that seems to be an area there should be a focus on that doesn't seem to be covered by this, the new area of focus as described here, to check the accounting in those situations.
Ms. Thompson.
So to respond to that particular point, I think that's actually probably the area that you're talking about, Councillor Bacon, probably doesn't entirely fall within our remit. So when Jason was talking about accounting for the COVID-19 grants, this is funding, a significant amount of funding that the council has received from different departments, government departments, and that has come with very different spending restrictions or requirements, some of which mean that, as Jason explained, it's a pass-through funding effectively, and some of it is funding that the council retains, some of it is funding that can be used for any purpose, some of it has a very specific purpose. So we're focused very much on whether the accounting is right. As a consequence of that, then we might find other elements, but it may be something that internal audit is more likely to cover in terms of how people have taken on different roles and whether that's been effective. So that may be a question you want to pose to internal audit in their section.
Yes, Ms. Goods. Sorry.
Councillor Bacon, I'm the Chief Internal Auditor for the Internal Audit Service. In answer to your question, that could be an area that we would get involved in. It depends on the overall risk rating, i.e. we can audit anything and everything within the organisation. It is dependent upon whether we have the resource and whether we believe that the activity is of significant risk exposure, which would warrant us to look at it. We have been performing a number of COVID assurance work across the organisation, and that was specifically looking at the governance arrangements around decisions when we potentially needed to flex on governance arrangements, but specifically looking at redeployment of staff has not been covered by us.
Councillor Bacon, are you happy with those responses?
Yeah, I'm learning as I go along, but that sounds okay so far.
It does, and we're all learning as well. Councillor Lilly.
I just wanted to raise, I mean, totally get your point about the, on page 10, about looking at the government grants and making sure that there, you know, was due diligence there. In previous audits, because I have been a past member of Audit Committee, so I've seen previous audits, you've also looked at other grant areas, and there was an area of, in the past, on public health, which you did raise issues on. Those were reportedly addressed. Are you going to, within this audit, look at other major grants that come through, like public health grants, and that those were properly properly used? Thank you.
Ms. Thompson?
So the quick answer to that, I would suggest, is no. We are very much focused on the, so I don't know if I've got feedback again. I don't know if that, we are very much focused on the accounting for COVID-19 grants, but for specific reasons that are set out in the detail of the report, which I think, or a little bit more detail, which is on page, I can't read the numbers, page 19, I think. In terms of public health, no, there are no plans to look at that in specific detail, although, Jason, we do look at grant income in certain aspects. I don't know if you want to pick that up.
Yeah, no, thanks, Helen. In terms of our normal procedures, checking material grants that have been received by the council and whether that was accounted for appropriately. So we do check other areas. It's just not flagged as an increased risk in our audit plan, but we do audit those as part of our normal procedures if it is material.
Chief Internal Auditor.
Again, in answer, Councillor Lilly, to your question, there are also a number of grants that may require. I do. I will talk up louder. So, internal audit for a number of the grants to which the organisation receives, there's very often a requirement for the Chief Internal Auditor and for the Chief Executive to physically sign them off. When that occurs, and that will be part of the terms and conditions of the grant when it is awarded, and there will be a particular passage within their terms and conditions, we undertake a number of checks to make certain that we are satisfied before we sign it off that that has occurred. In relation to the public health grant, I think the audit that you have been historically referring to was the piece of work to which internal audit performed, which would have been looking at the outcomes in relation to public health grant and whether they were being achieved when pockets of funding were given to areas of the organisation to achieve the public health outcomes. So that was a historic one. But in relation to the grants, a vast majority of them, not all of them, but a vast majority require us to get involved from an internal audit perspective. When they do, they will form part of your progress report from internal audit.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands up, so presumably this is merely for us to note. I'll be moving that. Thank you to colleagues from Ernst & Young for attending this morning. We are a fairly new membership committee, so we will be attending very closely to those things that you report to us in due course. You will have heard a couple of lines of interest from colleagues already, and certainly looking through this, I can see those colleagues, particularly who've got scrutiny responsibilities, may want to look at this carefully, because it may stimulate some good lines of inquiry through scrutiny, which would be the appropriate place to look at that. Certainly the way in which the council sets its budget, rather than the way in which the council is spending its money. So that's an observation from a former chair of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, who's trying to remember he's no longer the chair of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. But thank you again to colleagues from Ernst & Young. We look forward to hearing from you in due course, and hope that your work here goes well and pleasantly. And colleagues, if otherwise, we will note that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Chair.
So, as I outlined at the beginning, we will now skip item 5 and move to item 6, because item 5 was moving down the agenda. Item 6 is the internal audit progress report. You'll find that on pages 79 onwards of your pack. Chief Internal Auditor, do you wish to make any brief opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So on a regular basis, the internal audit section will bring to you progress to complete work in relation to the agreed annual audit plan. So this particular report is in relation to our 2021 work. You will see on page 76 that it narrates that we have actually completed all areas. And then we go through in the detail under section 7, where we bring to you a brief description around the issues that have been arising. The first areas are those that are deemed to be of limited assurance, and you will see that we commence with CCTV, digital strategy, Greenmount, and then on page 80 we go into those where they may contain high risks, but they're rated as assurance, and then as reasonable assurance, and then we have the remaining areas, i.e. payroll, accounts receivable and Roxall. The final areas of this particular report are under section 8, and they are to present to you where we have historically performed an audit and there are exceptions that are open and actions that we perform an assessment to determine whether those actions have been implemented. So from section 8 onwards, you will see it commences with bank and cash, but that is to narrate that we have performed a follow-up, and you can see down the right-hand column whether the individual actions are closed and whether they're in progress. Chair, I wasn't going to go into any greater detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions either between myself or my colleague, Wayne Petty. The individual that performed the audit on digital is not present. They are on leave. However, I will do my utmost to answer any questions.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm sure there will be questions on that matter. Certainly, it's my feeling that we might want to look at how those matters which are of limited assurance, we might bring the full report to the committee. I understood there was a change of practice in the past to limit the amount of paper that was brought to this committee, but certainly having had sight of that report on the digital strategy, it makes me feel that it would be better to bring the most full report to the committee in future, but we'll keep an eye on that. Colleagues, questions?
Chair, can I just pick up on that point you just made?
Councillor Bacon.
And there's some very concerning things in all these limited assurance areas, and particularly the digital strategy one. Why don't we actually get the full report for those areas in any event? I'd have thought we should have the original documentation rather than the summary to see what's led to what is said here.
I think that's a matter of history which I'd like to change, but yes.
It is a matter of history, and previous committees and previous chairs collectively have actually asked us not to bring along the whole reports. So we've had a change over time, and I think yourself and I were discussing that the items that are included in this report, as you are a new committee, if you think there is additional information or information that you don't want to have included, then we can have that discussion and make those changes. But previous members have requested not to have full reports. I think perhaps because it was a little overwhelming in the PwC days when you used to have reams and reams of paperwork.
So our colleagues before us have sought to save on the amount of trees chopped down, but also on their reading time. And I have some sympathy with the first one, but not necessarily the second one. I think, and it's certainly something I've had a discussion with the Chief Internal Auditor about, that I think that something like limited assurance is such that we would want as a committee to see the full report. And it's on us to do that. And however well summarised, there will always be a sense that you lose some of the depth of the detail and indeed of the concern expressed in those lengthier reports. And that might lead members, councillors, to overlook an area that they should be questioning. So certainly, whilst I'm currently in the chair, I shall be seeking to ensure that you get much more to read where it is the most appropriate to read it. But as we can see, so certainly, I guess what we really need to be hearing now is there are concerns expressed. Can we be assured that those concerns are being dealt with? It concerns me to read a phrase that says that our CCTV use in council buildings is falling short of Home Office good practice expectations and legislative requirements. We are a more and more data aware society, and that raises with us not only just a risk around not complying with the law, but a reputational risk as well that arises from that. The public have the right to know that we are doing things properly. So that concerns me. But does anybody want to comment on the CCTV paper from the officers' side as to how they feel things are moving forwards, or do they feel that these remarks will be ones that could be Tipexed out in due course because they have been dealt with? Councillor Stevens, do you want to comment on that area?
Thank you, Chairman. We can't just ignore some of these things. On page 104, key areas of concern. And I think that trying to cater for them in 2, 4, 5, 6 or 7 lines is not the way to go about this. I think that, these areas of concern have probably each element has got a financial value, a financial risk on it. And to put it in like that, I think we need to make sure that we get the information. You were talking just previously, we don't need a forest or even a COPS. What we need is, okay, send it to us digitally. And I think then each member can, if they so desire, print off what they need to print off. But I would say that, you know, that's the first thing I want to say is the key areas of concern, which are on page 104 and 105. I think that, you know, there's more behind those elements than is stated there. And I think what we need to do is actually try and find ways forward to, one, find out what the cause was, two, what we're actually doing about it, and three, what the resulting impact is going to be.
So from the page references, I guess you're referring actually to that report under item 7. Am I right in
Councillor
it's relevant, of course.
Councillor Stevens, you've moved on to the annual opinion, which is the next report. To pick up on the point, though, that you are making, a number of those areas have already been brought to this committee, be it in the format that is in the progress report currently, which you are now requesting that you have full detail. However, the page 104 that you are referencing is in relation to my annual opinion, and the greater detail for a number of them, for example, school landlords, FOI, children with disability, have already been to this committee.
Thank you for that. So we are most definitely on the internal audit progress report at the moment. But there are crossovers, of course, in some of potentially in some of it. Just on that there's agreed actions are scheduled to be implemented by the 30th of September, so not long now, on the CCTV audit. Are they on track? Is somebody able to say those actions are on track to be?
We haven't yet visibility, but those actions, what we can do is revisit to bring along to the very next committee, if that is agreeable with yourself, Chair, and committee members.
I think so. Councillor Stevens?
Chairman, what date is the next meeting? Because this has a bearing on CCTV and everything else. I mean, perhaps I'm in the wrong room at the wrong meeting.
7th of September. It's towards the end of September. The next meeting of audit.
Right.
That's Lily.
Sorry, I've lost a little bit. I'm still on digital strategy.
We're moving through the items on item 6, yes. So,
are we
just
on
confirming
digital
the
strategy?
data. So I just raised a point about CCTV.
Sorry.
But digital strategy is the next item on that paper.
Okay, thank you.
So, but I believe our next meeting is towards the end of September, so it would be appropriate to have a report on that. 27th, as I said. So the Director of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add that the CCTV report covers a number of staff who have actions responsible here, and not obviously all of those officers are here today. There is one action assigned to myself, which relates to identifying some capacity and resource to coordinate some of the corporate buildings activities. That is obviously going to be dependent on being able to find some additional resource to go with it, but it is a matter that is currently being investigated and dealt with. But unfortunately, I can't comment for all the other areas.
Thank you for that. I think what we'll be looking at is then at our September meeting, seeing how the progress has been made on that. So the next item on the internal progress report is the digital strategy. Councillor Lilly.
Yes, sorry, I apologise. I've got a hearing problem on this side of my ear at the moment, so I apologise to members of the committee if I come across a bit deaf today, but I am. So there you are. I'm very concerned about this report, members will people be aware that I in the past get particularly heightened on risk management and risk when things are in the high or the could be on the verge of critical. And I do feel we should have more detail, right, on this particular item. I think there's a number of question marks about its deliverability and viability and value for money. I've got a copy of the actual report that I've had a look at, and there's some real concerns, and I feel that we should flag this one out to have considerations on the agenda in the next meeting. So there's time so that we can have, and I would like the full report on this, because I think part of the role of audit is to at times dig deep, and I would like to dig deep on this particular strategy, right? And report within that. It's extremely important. We are in the digital world, and we've now got, you know, regularly in the national newspapers how people's systems are attacked, right? More and more people, because of COVID, are reliant on digital more than ever. So we really do need to, you know, this to me is very critical. If you get it wrong at digital, then that can have a knock-on effect on all services within this. So I really want to highlight that I, as a member, take this extremely seriously, that we need to get more information from the internal audit and obviously our officers to be able to have our next meeting able to dig deep much more. And that's my particular thing.
Councillor Bacon.
Thanks. I'm not sure. I'm happy to wait until the next meeting if it's not for quite a while, because I note the reference on it's page 8 of the actual report, page 88 of the bundle. The risk the website will ultimately not be fit for purpose. I mean, this is ongoing work, but this brief summary seems to suggest that we're not sure what's happening, how much is being spent, or what it's being spent on. And I'd really rather find out that detail we've referred to a lot sooner than waiting till September. I don't know if it can be, I'm not necessarily suggesting we have an urgent meeting, but I think we should certainly be informed, I don't know, 7 days, 14 days, something like that, whatever's possible. But in that regard, I was, again, learning, I suppose. I'm just asking about the process. So we've got a summary here. Is it possible to know how the summary is arrived at? Is there an original report which this is then drawn down from, or there's a series of steps that lead to this? That would be useful to know, because obviously we want to know what information there is we could possibly have sight of.
So, Councillor Bacon, there is a full audit report. Those full audit reports go to the relevant clients, i.e. in this instance would have gone to Claire Chand as director for that particular area. If it crosses over more than one directorate, it obviously goes to whichever directors and the operational managers that sit underneath. So there is a fuller report. You have a summarised version, which we've already discussed. You can now receive the whole item when it is limited and above, i.e. no assurance. So you will continue to get summarised versions for the reasonable and the assurance ones contained within our progress report. When you receive, and I'll make certain after this meeting that you get a full copy of our report, within the report, so it's an internal audit report, they get signed off by the Chief Internal Auditor as an independent mechanism. They will narrate wider narrative around what it was that we were looking at and those individual results against those individual areas. They also cover what we would assess as being the risk and the consequence of the risk exposure if one is identified. And it also covers the individual actions to which the directors and operational managers have signed up to implement. It may be worth clarifying that for a number of years, internal audit don't generally make recommendations. The clients, from our perspective, know and understand their business is far greater, and if we are all in agreement that there is a risk exposure, then the clients come up with proposed actions. We can guide and have input, and then if we're all in agreement, there will be a nominated responsible party to action any of those actions that have been included alongside a time scale to implement them. Whilst the client again comes up with the action dates, if we're not comfortable that it would take too long, then we won't sign off the report. So there is good collaboration towards the end of our pieces of work where we capture what actions will be implemented. Does that clarify your query?
I think so, yeah. So I think then, Tim, could we, and we'll come to the green map one in a minute because I've got concerns about that as well, but could we on the digital strategy request ASAP the original version of the report before it was handed down for summarising?
That is going to be happening,
staff.
yes. Yeah,
Right.
so certainly all members to have sight of that report. Before I come to you, Councillor Stevens, the summary report refers to agreed actions being scheduled to be implemented by the 30th of June. 30th of June is in the past. Are all agreed actions now? That presumably we'll see those agreed actions partly in the full report, or are they elsewhere? Because we'd want to know that those actions have both been implemented and are showing signs that they are being effective as well. So first of all, have they been implemented? The director first, I'll choose between you.
Yeah, happy to do that, Chair, thank you. And I do appreciate that obviously it is a matter of concern for the committee, and nobody wants to end up with a limited assurance report, I can assure you. Just to provide some context around the project itself, which I hope will help. So this is a project that was intended to be across 3 phases. So in other words, over a 3-year period. So phase 1 was intended to launch a beta site, so in other words, a proof of concept site, upon which the subsequent developments and improvements could be built upon. So phase 1 of that project commenced in October 2019, and 6 priority service areas were identified for being in that first tranche of review for the website project. So that those areas were planning, registrars, fostering adoption, revenues and benefits, human resources, and the waste service. Sadly, as I'm sure we've all heard this morning, that only 4 months into that project, we had one of the biggest worldwide emergency situations arise in terms of COVID-19, and that has required a cross-council response from every single department and directorate. I've had staff that have been working in care homes to support frontline services, and unfortunately this project was a consequence of having to release in particular the communication staff that were assigned to this project in order to manage that essential communications with our island communities about the situation as it was emerging. As a result of that, there was a significant gap in the project resource available between March 2020 and December 2020, and that did have an impact on our ability to run and manage the project as we would otherwise have done. At the end, what you will, when you see the full report, what you will identify from it is, and I think there's probably a reference to it in the summary, is that as a result of the end of that phase one, the project did not deliver all of the things that it had set out to do. What it had done is that all the basic work that had been necessary to design and build the beta site was in fact completed. And that in itself was a significant amount of work that the remainder of the project team continued to operate on in order to keep the project going. And we were able to develop the draft website content for planning services, fostering and adoption, registrars and coastal management. However, what we do recognise is that the audit itself, the audit does actually acknowledge the impact of COVID that was had on the project, but did identify weaknesses in the way in which that the project management structure was being operated, in that it said the project scope and delivery timescales were not sufficiently detailed over the lifetime of the project, that there was gaps in the roadmap for addressing some of the legislative requirements that are required. So, for example, with the new accessibility legislation, and indeed in terms of publication of some of our transparency data. Those weren't specific items related to the project itself, but nevertheless items related to it. And that our project plans were not in sufficient detail to give assurance of delivery, and that the project governance arrangements through the project board were not working as they should. Suffice it to say that due to the lack of capacity, the project team didn't have time to do all of that, and were working through the best they could in terms of delivering an outcome. So where are we now? We obviously accept the recommendations in the report. Things haven't gone as they had hoped. But we are committed to making sure that we deliver the website project as it was intended. So thus far, we've now got the reallocation of the existing staffing complement back to the project, although we do have a current gap in our software development team following the sad death of one of our employees, but that will be resolved shortly. We've also now got back some resource from the organisation intelligence team to help us with the project assurance role, and that they will be able to give us that oversight and support in terms of managing the project manager who runs the project. And indeed, that individual now reports into the organisation intelligence team. We've completed a complete overhaul of the project documentation. So all of the corporate documentation is now being utilised, and the project plans are in the final stages of being signed off. Slightly over the 30th of June deadline, but they are there and ready for us to sign off. The project board is now meeting on a weekly basis. That's chaired by me, and we are closely monitoring all project management activity at that level, and officers are obviously being held account for that. Some of the preparation of the roadmap, as I described in terms of the legislative requirements, had been done to ensure compliance, but clearly they weren't in sufficient detail, and that also is being finalised. We've also commenced the build of a replacement content management system that delivers the website itself, and we've also developed the necessary plans that are vital to make sure that we can make sure there's connectivity between all the third-party software suppliers that drive behind our systems and our customer relation management system. So I hope that gives members some degree of assurance that we have taken the audit seriously. I'm more than happy to provide more detail and any other site of information or points of reference that councillors would like to receive.
Councillor Stevens, I think you had a question, or not now?
It's quite a while back, actually, Chair, thank you. But I will touch in on this, which I did earlier. It is a concern. It's a major concern of this administration, I feel sure. To say that we're slipping behind already with agreements that of new ways forward doesn't augur well. I think that what we need to do is, with these key areas of concern, I don't just take digital strategy, but we need to make the items individually, but we need the backups for all of these, and not just Green Mountain digital strategy. All of these key areas of concern should be looked at more thoroughly. I'll revert back now to because we have Claire Shand here. I just want to be reassured that you have the numbers of staff. You say you're one down, but the numbers of staff to pick up with where we are or where we were and continue running in a positive way. Because I've read the full report and it's not very good at all. And I think when others read the full report, they'll probably say the same. I'm not here to criticise when others haven't had sight of something, so I'm going to keep that down. But really, we've got to build from where we are or where we were and move this forward. But I think that I follow Councillor Lilly's lead on this, that quite possibly a meeting prior to the September meeting might be advised so that we can actually pick up, make sure that things are in place, make sure that we're heading in the right direction. Because phase one is not completed, is that correct, Claire? It's not completed as yet. Phase two is being started. Money for phase one was £230,000. Staff were sent on COVID-19 pandemic duty and had to be, obviously had to be seconded there, but we need to make sure that we recover that funding back. And the other thing is phase two is, I believe, valued at another £210,000, which has already gone through a corporate management team and okayed. Now, I really think that if we're here to monitor and, if you like, agree certain actions through audit and indeed through cabinet, we need to make sure that we have a hand on the finance and corporate management team. And I'm not going to be critical of corporate management team because, quite honestly, they carry the weight of the council. But what I would say is that we need to understand what is going to corporate management team, what is going to be decided on, and the rationale behind that decision. Because at the end of the day, the buck stops here, the media, it hits the media, and what have we got? What have we got? We've got not the rationale, no reasoning, nothing brought forward other than sometimes just 3 or 4 lines to say that's the way the decision's gone. So I'll leave it at that, Chair. Not happy at all. And by the way, I could actually dig down at all of these: school landlord and freedom of information, CCTV, children with disability, and Green Mount, with the same attitude as I've got now. I'm not happy with the way what we've inherited is not good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Lilly, and then if we can sort of work towards how audit is going to add value to this process, so a discussion around that.
Try and put this into some kind of. Well, I want to ask a question first.
Ask your question
audit,
first, then.
And then I'll put a proposal. When you are fixing the traffic lights, right, of red, green, amber, etc., critical, high, medium. In this case, when you put in your report, I mean, well, I won't necessarily put this case, but in cases, can there be a situation where you actually put something as red, as critical, and then put it to the council or your client, right? And is there a discussion, and can that be moved in that discussion from critical red to amber?
The short answer is yes, it can, but only if there is evidence that alters how it's been assessed. So the independence that we have, and I think you're probably aware, I'm employed physically by Portsmouth City Council, not the Isle of Wight Council. Although we have 2 officers on the Isle of Wight that are employed by the Isle of Wight, but they report into myself. We are evidence-based. So when we get to the end of our audit and we sit down with the client, it is very appropriate for us to do a sense check that the evidence that we have or that might be lacking is accurate. And there are occasions that we get it wrong and we get the evidence provided to us. That is the only way that the ratings, be them for the individual exceptions, may change. Ultimately, there can be discussions, but the final decision rests with myself, and I have to abide by public sector internal audit standards, which are mandatory to me. So I can have conversations with Director for Corporate Resources, for example, and additional evidence can be provided, and I can alter the opinion. There is never pressure on me from the senior management team collectively for this organisation where they want to unduly influence our position. I have experienced it elsewhere, but not for this authority. So I feel very comfortable that our ratings and our messages do not get diluted under duress or pressure by any senior officers. I have not experienced that for the entire time that I've been here, and I would push back very firmly if I ever did encounter that. I also have Section 151 officer who again is employed by Portsmouth, to which we have the natural feed into in relation to their rule and their remit and their responsibility. So I can only give you my assurances. If I have the evidence, may alter. If I don't have the evidence and I am satisfied that we have undertaken the work properly and we've assessed the risks properly, then the rating will be our rating. And maybe just to confirm that the summaries that are in these reports, I would have agreed all of the wording. And the reports, full reports, I would have agreed all of the full reports. And the only final thing that I wanted to add, which is not necessarily related, Councillor Lilly, to your question, but the narrative that is in these reports in relation to COVID, we wouldn't add something in if we didn't think it was very relevant at the time. And that's probably the last element that I wanted to just raise with you.
Can I ask a supplementary question?
Yes, you can.
Thank you for your comprehensive reply. It's very respected. Can you totally assure me that on this digital strategy, which is high risk, which is sort of amber colour, was never, ever read, right? And that critical. Thank you.
Councillor Lilly, this was never critical and it was never read.
Thank you.
I think that, so what I want to do now is work out what this committee can do to add value to this process. So we've heard from the director around the actions being implemented. Yes, they have slipped beyond their timetable, but they are being implemented. I'm aware that we have the Cabinet member, Councillor Jones-Evans. Do you want to add something to this briefly?
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate indulging me just one moment. Yeah, looking at the report and talking to Councillor Stevens, I think it would be really helpful, though actually it's probably more of a scrutiny question, is the understanding the principle of us not purchasing a CMS system and choosing to build us, because it seems to be choosing to build our own system for a small local authority seems to be the catalyst for these issues that we're now looking at the board report. That's just from my perspective. I have literally no understanding of how that was arrived at, and it may be more of a scrutiny question, but it's bothering me. I just thought I'd bring it up now.
I can understand that it would bother you. My feeling is that is a scrutiny question. That's around a different set of questions from that which audit looks at. Councillor Hastings, who's chairman of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, and I had a meeting last week, an informal meeting around how we can make sure that the dialogue between our two committees is very effective. And certainly he and I will be meeting over August to discuss certain things that I will highlight to him that I think his committee could be looking at it, and in turn he may highlight some things back to us that we should be looking at. We are two sides of a coin that ultimately delivers the public's assurance in how the services are being delivered and their money is being spent. So it's right that we work together but complement each other and not tread on each other's toes. Councillor Lilly, you have a proposition for us.
I wish to make a proposal, Chair. One is, I think, if we could have a copy of the full report and to be able to deal with this matter at our next meeting. But in the interim, if that could come to the chair and the vice chair, because elected now the vice chair of Audit, that we perhaps have a more detailed briefing about that, particularly taking Councillor Bacon's concerns about the time, but September is not that long away in the great scheme of things, and we do have certain things like August, recess, etc. So that's part of my proposal. The second is, and I think you've just sort of said in your talk with the Chair of Scrutiny, that because this does come under corporate scrutiny, I think it should be on the agenda of the next Corporate Scrutiny Committee as well, right?
Well, obviously that will be
subject to the chair of.
But I would certainly encourage him to think in that direction. And I would concur with what you suggested. We will formally. It's already been said that all members of the committee will get the full reports on the limited assurance, not just now but in the future. But we will minute that so that there's a kind of a trail to that, so any member of the public could see that we had taken this seriously from our minutes. Certainly, I think that myself as chair and vice chair could have a discussion first around how we might take that forward over the summer. There may be a case for an informal meeting amongst ourselves to work that out and absolutely bring it back to our meeting on the 27th of September for a further digging through, by which time hopefully we will be able to hear from officers or know from officers that actions that were agreed have all been implemented, that they are showing signs of effectiveness, but also, and I'm very aware August is a time for rest, and gosh, everybody needs some time for rest as well, but also that there has been learning from how this came about, because obviously at some point the whole pandemic crisis plan is going to be updated, and part of that is how organisations respond to things and spotting the early warning signals of where things are just not going in the right direction, so that our corporate management team can act as early as possible and as effectively as possible. So what we obviously, we want to learn from this. This is not about just pointing fingers and saying you did that and why, but actually what happened, how have we learned, how have we brought this back on track? Because the digital strategy is crucial to the way in which services are going to be delivered. We've all been through a year and a half now in which we've depended upon technology to deliver many aspects of our lives that we would normally have done physically, and that's going to go on in the future. Ultimately, we want a website that's fit for purpose and that the public can use with ease and be satisfied that their council is actually delivering the services that they want to do. They see these things done well by other authorities and by the private sector. So it should not be beyond the wit of the Isle of Wight Council to be a leader, hopefully, in that area as well. Councillor Lilly, do you want to come back on that? Otherwise, we'll...
Just particularly on your point of the importance of the digital, as chair of planning, the planning portal is extremely important, and particularly through COVID, where there's been an increase of applications. Residents rely on that portal 100% to get information and put their views. They haven't had the opportunities of physical meetings and things. So that portal, and there's a huge amount of complaints that come from people that the accuracy of that portal is often, missing. And this is linked to that. And you mentioned about the, Claire, you mentioned about you raised the work on that portal. So I'll just say that's one area why we really do need to get this, and this is why we need to put a matter of urgency, of scrutiny, well, and audit on this.
Councillor Bacon, is that a hand up? Yes.
I'm no great fan of the idea that we all shut down in August. I really have got a lot of concerns, and picking up on comments you've made and Councillor Stevens has made, can we not just have that original first draft, whatever it is, report in 7 days?
I think it will be by the end of today. I'm sure that the committee members will have had that full report.
If it can be by the end of tomorrow, Chair, I have
I was going to say 7 days. Tomorrow's fine by me, but I really just think we want to see it as soon as possible.
Absolutely, and I think that is recognised and understood. In terms of going forward with through myself and the Vice Chair, in terms of assessing this, our colleagues, are you happy, content with that process? Obviously, we would flag up to any.
Proposed it. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah.
Councillor
Agreed.
John?
Yeah. So I appreciate that time is passing, and I am concerned that you indicated to me issues about where you need to be elsewhere. So,
Chair, if I can ask, I have to, without a doubt, I've left by 12:30.
12:30.
I will move everything else around.
That's very kind of you, and obviously we were scuppered a little by technology at the start. We're still on this item, so other matters relating to item 6, which is the internal audit progress report. Well, because I left him behind at one point, I'll take Councillor Stevens first and then Councillor Lilly.
I feel better. I'm still going to stick with the key areas of concern. And as I said earlier, and I think we've buffeted this to one side a little bit by websites and bits and pieces, quite rightly so, because I said I'll definitely I'm not happy with regard to that. But these other key areas of concern to these lines of business for this Isle of Wight Council are very important. And to see only 6 lines with each of them really doesn't give the Audit Committee a a rounded version of what there is with regard to that key area of concern. And I just think that we need to, and you can, and Chairman, I'm not going to die in a ditch over this, but what we need to do is say, okay, would you, Chairman, and your Vice Chairman discuss when these comes up, when this comes up, discuss how we can better inform the committee and indeed others with regard to
Is that still
key areas of concern.
That's the page 104.
Yep.
Is that?
I'm still,
because I think that's
I'm still
the next
driving
phase.
back on that because you're dismissing things here. Thank you.
If it's page 104 that you're referring to, Councillor Stevens, that actually in the next report isn't it? So we're not rushing past that. We will be arriving at that report in a moment. Councillor Lilly.
I just wanted to say that obviously Greenmount School is high. Obviously Greenmount School is in the right area within that, and I suppose that this obviously gets linked or referred to Hampshire because obviously it comes under Hampshire, the education, and obviously under our cabinet member Councillor Andre. And I suppose all I would propose is that if it could be sort of reported back at the next meeting, because obviously there's agreed actions are scheduled to be implemented by 31st of July in that regard. Because obviously the schools have been through a very, very difficult time. Being a governor of a school, not this specific school, and actually retaining staff able to do the normal things of governors has been extremely difficult for schools because you've had to do that virtually. We lost that sort of contact. So I have some sort of empathy to schools having difficulty, right? During this period and previously. So I just would. I think it's important that we perhaps put refer this to obviously the cabinet member who's obviously dealing with this on their agenda, and that we do obviously get a report back within this. But I just want to sort of flag up the very strong empathy towards schools. No school wants to be, on an audit report or whatever within this. And I think it's making sure that those schools get all the support they can to put things in order that they need to put in order.
Certainly, and I'm sure the cabinet member is very cited on this, and will be aware that we will be interested. And
that goes for Roxall as well.
Yeah, and obviously we as a committee will follow through on this. It's good with.
Chair, if I may just put into context the school's audit. The arrangements that were previously in place were that there were themed reviews carried out, and themed reviews may look at 2 or 3 operational areas across 8 schools. I don't find that a particularly effective means of auditing. So for a number of years, certainly for the last 2 years, since we've changed the model for auditing and the provider for auditing, we have quite an in-depth programme of activities that we audit. The schools, when they are flagged with this committee, I will raise with you if there is a failing on the LEA side of the equation. But due to the nature of the programme that we test against, if I'm bringing schools to you, the failings are on the governing body and on the head teachers, not the LEA. But I will, if the LEA, if it emerges that there is failings there, as I said, flag to yourself. What we are finding, because there has been perhaps reduced visibility and sight of auditing, that a number of the schools, when we audit them, we are identifying gaps and issues, but we've built in with colleagues on the LEA side and at the schools forum, to which I recently presented, that we would be sharing and disseminating good practice in order to support them going forward. So again, I will bring key elements back to this committee as and when they occur.
Councillor Bacon.
Thank you for that. That's interesting. Now, I'm someone who's been a school governor for 11 years now, and schools are struggling massively due to the continued underfunding, and it does make it difficult for them to do the job. One thing that did jump out of the mentions of Green Mountain Wroxall to me, though, is the potential issues with PTA funds. Which is a concern, as recently we've had an ex-PTA chair, he's now doing time for embezzling PTA funds. So I'm just wondering if there's something more widely we ought to be concerned about here and looking into, because as I say, we've got that one extreme instance, but to have it mentioned twice in one report just flashed a, pardon me, but red light.
There is difficulty within the schools, as you say, for the resources on some occasions. The PTAs, there is a requirement that they have an independent accountant to look at them and sign them off. Our jurisdiction and involvement with them is very limited because of the nature of what they are. However, the one thing that we will attempt to verify is that there has been that independent accountancy verification. So I think over the last year, because of COVID, a lot of the schools have probably put it to one side. It is envisaged, though, that they will be picking up on those areas to make certain that they are audited moving forward. So in relation to, is it something that you need to be significantly concerned about? I think the answer to that is probably no, because they generally hold quite small funds. That doesn't mean to say that there can't be frauds and thefts occurring. But I think moving forward, it just so happens that in the last year, they've not had those accounts signed off, probably because there's been very limited activity in and around them as well.
Okay. If there are no other points on this paper, we made a couple of resolutions specifically around the digital strategy. Otherwise, we'll note the report. Obviously, we're all learning here, but I'm sure through the cycle of the year, we'll see how there is a narrative builds around audit, so that we can making sure that we're contributing effectively to this area of work. If I can, I'll move us on then to item 7, the Isle of Wight Council Annual Audit Report. Do you wish to add any brief remarks to it?
Very brief remarks, if that's okay, Chair. So on an annual basis, internal audit, all of its work contributes towards an opinion as to the effectiveness of the internal control framework. There are 4 levels that can be attributed. You will note for the Isle of Wight that reasonable assurance is given. That is a positive. For an organisation of this size, it is anticipated that there will always be pockets of control weaknesses. So I wanted to flag that specifically as a positive thing. I think I've already taken on board Councillor Stevens's request for there to be greater narrative. As I said, many of those areas have been to the previous committees, be it in the original format of a summarised. Moving forward, and I think I will check with you, Chair, and the committee as a whole, as to whether perhaps at the end of the year, because this is an end of the year report and you'll only get it once, maybe it may be helpful to have perhaps those key areas of concerns re-presented. The only reason they are noted there is because they are the only areas of 54 reviews that were rated as limited. And again, I'd like to echo that as being a positive thing for the organisation. So I am happy to take any questions. There's a lot of statistical information in there. It is really to give you a flavour for the level of risk exposure.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bacon.
So there's one very specific point, I think. It's page 112 of the big bundle, which is page 16 of the report. Test and trace £500 isolation payments. There seemed to be an awful lot of potential problem there. 30 payments were sought to be verified and 10 didn't meet the criteria, 33%. What's the clarification work that's ongoing, and has it clarified matters?
So Test and Trace was one of the grants administered by, or not administered, but given by central government. They were implemented at speed, but at the time there was very little evidence that was required to be submitted by the applicants, i.e. they were basically asked to confirm that they would have a drop in salary, not that a drop had actually occurred. It was to get the payment out quite promptly. The terms and conditions via central government is that there has to be a minimum of 10% check. You had approximately 300 and something applications as at the time of our testing. The testing that we undertook, which could have been ourselves or the service, was to verify that an actual decrease in salary had occurred, bearing in mind the evidence was never required up front. And there is a portal access to the HMRC website, and you would expect that if there was a drop in income, that it would show on there. And the queries that are outstanding is what we have identified for this authority and elsewhere is some employers decided to not make a deduction, but enforce that the individual had to take leave, or they have insisted that there is a sickness payment for it. Now, the clarification element is we've had to go back to central government a couple of times to say that doesn't meet the requirements of what you specified. What do you want us to do about it? So we've also sought additional narrative around that. You will find issues in relation to pockets like this where there was no evidence required up front. And this is, with due respect, members of the public who at the time believed their pay was due to decrease.
Okay.
Essentially £50,000 could have gone out if you follow the statistics, the proportions up.
Could I ask, in relation to the test and trace, we have the ability to ask for the money back if there is no supporting evidence, and we have begun asking for money back.
And that would be quite appropriate. And certainly we are aware that those, just from following the news, that the extraordinary nature of all sorts of payments has led to missed payment, some of which will of course be through people knowingly seeking to get monies to which they were not entitled, but the vast majority, we must stress always, were honest belief from people that of the situation that they would be in, and I'm sure there's a lot of consideration of that in mind. Otherwise, this paper is Councillor Lilly.
Before I wish to approve that we accept the report, I do want to flag up two other areas which I think we do need to note and perhaps bring back concern. One is the FOI, the freedom of information, your area of concerns. I do get quite a lot of, I have a ward with residents that are very active in freedom of information, and they often tell me that the timescales haven't been met, and I think that's quite rightly highlighted. But I think it's important. That is a very, very important function, and I think we need to note that and see improvement there. And children with disability, again, this is, you know, a very, very high, well, these are the most vulnerable in our community. And obviously COVID did have a huge impact on that. But again, I think that we need to know that there's improvements, you know, regarding that. And I think if we can also make a note that Audit has raised this, so this could go to children's scrutiny, that we have highlighted it, and also the cabinet member highlighted within that. And then I will formally propose that we accept the report.
Yes, the report's here for noting, but Councillor Stevens gave us a lot to consider around the narrative on that key areas of concern, and I know that message we've heard already is taken on board. Our work through the year, of course, will pick up on things in any case. So we're not the sole guardian of things. Cabinet, scrutiny, ourselves, all working together, hopefully, will deliver on this. Otherwise, colleagues, are you content to note the report? We're all agreed. Thank you very much. We can move to item 8, anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy.
Chair, it's mine, but I'm going to take it as read and offer to answer any questions.
Colleagues, any questions?
I was going to just say that I read it. It is thorough. It's difficult to find the descriptive words in this case. So I'm just going to propose that we accept it. Can I have a seconder?
I will say, yeah, you do indeed. So are we agreed that we accept this? It is indeed thorough and comprehensive as far as we can see. And of course, again, I'll repeat that through this year, I'm sure if it isn't, we will find reason for recommending consideration or revision over the coming year. So thank you for that. That will take us to item 9, the council's risk profile. Is that everything that you needed to cover? Thank you for your forbearance on that, and safe journey to your next meeting. So who is looking after the council's risk? Are there any, the director, do you want to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is actually not my report. It's the report of the Assistant Chief Executive, who is on annual leave at this particular moment in time. And I said I would provide the committee with the update. So just to give a very quick overview, it provides the committee with the opportunity to review the council's strategic risks and to consider the effectiveness of the council's risk management arrangements. So when we mean strategic risks, those are the things which have the potential to prevent the delivery of corporate priorities. Obviously, directors own the strategic risks according to their specific service responsibilities, and the report gives details of how risk management arrangements operate within this local authority. So strategic risks are brought to the attention of Cabinet, and that's done through the reporting of the quarterly performance management report, the last one of which was 15th of July. So we have a total of 14 strategic risks, and there is a table within the report that sets out what the current position is for each of those risks. I may not be able to answer any detailed areas, but happy to answer any general questions or follow up with any specific points with relevant directors if there's a need to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I'm going to open up on this one. I think one of the things that I will benefit from, and I will look to do, is to work with officers to understand how you do use this risk register. What it struck me is, and the appendix is, it's a bit of a mishmash. It's a bit of a mishmash of information that's meant to reassure or inform, some tactical activities, some strategic objectives, and it just didn't feel like there was a common thread running through each heading of the risk register that actually said, this is our overall strategic objective, this is the tactical operation that we have in place to mitigate based against that objective as a kind of business as usual. Here are exceptional circumstances, this is what we're responding to tactically. Here is information that informs, here is information that reassures that we're going in the right direction. So I'm content in the sense that clearly the corporate management team has been used to working with this and understands how it informs them. But I think it could be much stronger in its presentation to really bring home that here is a really coherent approach being taken to how we manage risk. And a couple of places, words like identifying and this is in quotes, targeted offer. What does that actually mean in terms of being a mitigating statement? How does that? It means something behind the scenes, but it doesn't mean anything to anybody who's reading this from the outside. And big organisations are assessed by others who look at their risk registers and ask them, how are you dealing with these sorts of things? And I'm not sure that they would feel that they could properly understand what's going on there. So if there is an opportunity for me to sort of, as chair of audit, and if it is appropriate, sort of like to have a discussion with CMT at some point, and if that's also with cabinet colleagues or not, I'd include the vice chair in on this if possible, because I know he's always had a strong interest in the risk registers. So I'm not saying that I feel that there's anything wrong with the headings, and from what I can deduce from the statements about the mitigation, I think it could be brought out more strongly. And without rehearsing our discussion too much on the digital strategy, perhaps there may be elements what we learn from that actually help us inform the way in which we approach risk on that. But
yeah, I'm more than happy to feed that back to Wendy Pereira, and I'm sure she'll arrange a discussion with you.
thank you for that. Colleagues, any questions on the risk register? Councillor Lilly, surely. Let's have one. Councillor Lilly.
Yes, just to clarify, I am focusing on the risk register summary, yes? Yeah, want to get it clear. There's obviously, concerns when things are red, right? Within that, and obviously we have, a considerable amount of reds within that. I am concerned whether on 3, amber should be red, because staffing obviously coming through COVID, obviously with this current pinging, right, and isolation, would like to get more information about how much agency staff we're actually using. I know it's been considerable in planning, children's and adult social care, because obviously people have been off, particularly in critical parts of frontline staff, right, particularly. And also, the recruitment. I mean, I heard the other day that in 1 week, 8 social workers in children's just left, right, or gave in notice, and that there's a reliance on agency. So, there's real concern there that of retaining that, because obviously that's critical. And obviously agency costs are what, quadruple actual costs. They are putting serious financial pressure, right? And we do know, obviously, I think in somewhere we're clear around homelessness, I think picked up in one of the reports, that, you know, because of domestic violence has increased. That's not just locally, nationally, right? Relationship breakdown during COVID, so there are people more coming into the system, and domestic violence obviously brings in homelessness, but it also brings children into the care system as well. So I was worried that it was amber. I would be happier if it was red, and I would like for us to be reported back on that area. And I think particularly in this very difficult COVID period, and we all have our perhaps view of, has the government been a bit premature in its decision making, but that is seriously affecting. And also, I think under this, I raised my concerns about the working strategy. Obviously, we had a lot of people working from home. They're still working from home because this building is still pretty empty of that. How that is going to affect. So I do feel I'd like, as I say, I would be happier if that was red. I just feel that amber, there's a story there that I'd like to know why it's amber, and concerned of that within that. It doesn't, that staffing does link on to other parts of the risk register, particularly around item 10, right? And obviously there is concern there because obviously that's the care and the independent care sector. I would reiterate that I think it is part of the audit's role that we do flag up to other committees, right, and cabinet members. So I think the independent care sector would flag that up to health and social, sorry, health scrutiny, is it? Sort of thing, because I think of that. I do know through health scrutiny, they did invite the independent care sector to present. I think it was a pre-COVID, so it might be perhaps making a suggestion to Councillor Nicholson that it might be good to put that back on their agenda and actually talk to the care sector, especially in the light that is really flagged up in this report within that. And obviously, item 13, achieving the vision of the island. The pandemic has obviously thrown up. I mean, particularly the homeless issue, which I think obviously being, you know, picked up by other committees, hopefully, but it does have an overall effect. And again, I think having this on a future audit agenda is, you know, what does the world look from an audit point of view after COVID? Because we've had a car crash, haven't we? You know, I mean, our finances and our services have had a car crash, the same as across the whole country. We've done incredibly well, and we need to be saying of our staff, but we do need from an audit to actually look how this is coming in.
And
So that's my view of the risk.
and thank you for that. And no doubt that will go back through on, what was it, item 3, is particularly that point about further clarification
Yes.
as to why the ranking.
Yes, of course, and I guess in a similar vein to the internal audit reports, of course, there is a lot more detail in terms of the strategic risk register that goes as part of the quarterly performance report, which, as you say, gives that much more greater context of the issues, what's being done to mitigate those risks, and which obviously leads towards the overall assessment of, you know, where we make the RAG rating at any one point in time in the year. But just in terms of the staffing issues, of course, throughout COVID, we had both the silver group and the gold group, which were the command structures for managing the response. And of course, as part of that, a key issue was the monitoring of staffing levels and requirements across the board. Hence, of course, where we will have seen the redeployment of staff into some of those critical frontline services to avoid, wherever we possibly could, having to put agency staff in, and also to minimise the costs to the local authority in terms of its overall response. I think you're right, there's still an element of risk for us. It's less of a risk than it was during the height of the pandemic. And the silver response group and the gold group still meet on a fairly regular basis to make sure that they keep an oversight of our staffing capacity. I think there are some wider capacity issues, hence the risk itself originally being in there as part of the overall risk profile. There are some occupational areas which we know are traditionally very difficult to recruit to, social work being one of those, planning being another, as well as various others. So that will be all in the context behind the detail of this report. So I can see obviously you having more detailed information might assist the committee in greater depth.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bacon.
So this is a rather potentially daft question. The numbers. I don't know what the scale is. I can't see the key to judge what 6, 12, apart from the fact they're marked red, amber, green. I don't know if it's a scale out of 16, a scale out of 20. I think I've worked out that 6 is green and 7 is amber. So there's a dividing line there, but I'm not sure where the dividing line is between amber and red, and I don't know how high the reds go.
There is a risk matrix which is obviously not included within the report. I'm happy to make sure that that's made available to committee members, but it's effectively a grid which helps you to assess the probability and the likelihood, and depending on what score you give it, that will give it its overall rating. But that's obviously not included within the report.
It would be helpful, and
happy to provide that.
So you could say that. Can you say that if it's 6 green, that's actually borderline amber? So I see a 7 amber.
I haven't got the chart in front of me to know the specifics around that, but clearly the lower the number, the less of the risk, and the higher number. Oh, Joe, you know you've got the timetable, have you? Oh, excellent, thank you.
It would be useful to have that, because I say I don't. We've got 16 red. I don't know if that's the top of the scale or.
I think this word can help us a little, but we'll get the full matrix information.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Councillor Bacon, it's a 4x4 matrix in assessing likelihood and impact. So it's obviously 1 to 4 on each side. It's not a multiplication. There's like a depending on which is the risk, which is the impact, which is the likelihood, it depends what the score is, but the maximum score is 16. I think from mind 12 to 16 is high risk, 7 to 11 is amber risk, and 1 to 6 is green, but it depends on the likely impact and the likelihood of it as to where the probability is. There is a risk scoring matrix, as Mr. Chand has mentioned, and that's included in the risk policy, which will make sure you've got a link to going forward.
Thank you. I thought a 4x4 matrix was a car, so that would be helpful.
Yeah. So, any further comments around the risk register? Otherwise, we're asked to approve it, are we? I think that was the recommendation.
Still safer decision, Chair. So, yeah, the recommendation is that Audit Committee approves the strategic risks of the Council as set out in paragraph 10 and Appendix 1.
With all the caveats of the comments that we have made, do we otherwise approve the risk profile? I'll move that from the Chair. Are we agreed? Councillor Stevens, Councillor Bacon, do you wish to say that? That's why here. So it is approved, and that's why I said with the comments that we had made, and I think I think it is unlikely that it would be approved the next time without some obviously the audit committee engaging with those who use the register to get an understanding of how it's used, as I alluded to earlier. So I'll kick that off with myself as chair, but. So the next item is the delayed item 5, which is the procurement activity report. Is that with you yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is with me. Hayley Holden, who's the procurement manager, would normally be present to present this report to you as the individual, obviously with the skills and expertise on procurement itself. She's also on leave, so hopefully I'll be able to do it some justice. Again, there may be things that I might need to come back to you if you have any specific queries. So the procurement manager provides the audit committee with an overview of procurement and contract monitoring activity over the period. And this particular report covers the period October 2020 through to March 2021. So the central procurement team are a professional advisory service who provide advice and guidance on how to make sure that in the procurement activities that we undertake, we maintain compliance with the public sector procurement legislation. So within this reporting period, you'll see that there have been 85 procurement processes initiated across the council, where the regulations require us to undertake some form of formal process. Table 1 will provide you a breakdown of those areas, and as a result, that's resulted in 73 contracts now being awarded with a lifetime value of 159 million. Appendix 1 will give you a much more detailed breakdown of those contracts and their value. Table 2 also provides a brief breakdown and comparison with the previous quarters as to how, so you can get a feel of what the general level of activity is over the period. The team also operate the council's contract database. Currently there are 312 contracts contained within that system, with a lifetime value of 1.178 billion, so not an insignificant amount. To support the contract management or contract database, the team recently got approval to introduce an additional module to the database, which allows for more detailed contract management monitoring arrangements to be undertaken. It's a fairly new system, it's only just been introduced, but I know Hayley would want to say that it's going to help us take a much more robust approach to contract monitoring, compliance and checking. They've now managed to put on 17 contracts so far onto that system, all of which will have performance measures against them, and that will form the basis of regular reporting to the contract owners to ensure that we have proper oversight of what contracts are there to deliver. There's also a section in the report which talks about waivers process to contract standing orders, and this is something that is available to us where there are genuine circumstances that means that the procurement regulations or the contract standing orders can't be followed. And it's not about allowing for poor planning, it is essentially focused on where there are genuine circumstances of need. And where waiver requests are made, that goes through the procurement board to give it consideration. So during this period, 33 waivers have been granted. Table 4 in the report provides you with a breakdown and a full detail of each of them at Appendix 2. And finally, the report provides an update on the Council's procurement strategy itself, which was approved in 2019. You'll see there's reference in the report to the fact that we will be looking to refresh that strategy, largely due to the outcome of the Brexit transition, and making sure that we can respond to any emerging changes in procurement legislation, and of course to take into account refreshed priorities in our corporate plan. So I think that's all I had wanted to convey to committee members. Happy to attempt to answer questions as best I can.
Well, thank you for that. You're quite right. The waiver process should not be to sort of allow poor planning to become a norm in some way. But I did note that there was one on the corporate access control system upgrade where it's noted the software used was found to be out of date and posed a high risk for building security. And immediately below that, there's reference to a framework agreement having expired. Now, in life, always you find that there is something that's overlooked, but in both these cases, it kind of felt to me that this wasn't poor planning, but somewhere along the way, it hadn't been picked up that we the authority, weren't just checking on things, and that there was a process in place to just flag up and check a certain thing was in place long before. So at some point, things have been procured, and that should be the point at which I would have thought at the very latest that you set a date on which you're going to test that is it still fit for its purpose, or long before it actually reaches the end of its shelf life. So can you assure me that this is very much exceptional to find these sorts of things, that and that actually quite a bit of work goes into understanding how it was we got to this point. I see nods, but you may want to comment a bit further.
Joey's nodding because she's a member of the procurement board, so we'll have seen that particular waiver. And these, and I have to say, it's probably sound defensive, but it's not meant to be. It's got corporate source services against it, but it's not actually within my service area. So it's a corporate services issue or corporate issue, but not specifically within mine. So I don't have the detail of how that set of circumstances came about. But I can assure you that, as part of the procurement board process, we'd be wanting to see what remedial action is taken to prevent these things occurring.
So apart from just ticking that box, you send back a commentary that it's not necessarily a rap over the knuckles, but a strong hint as to how these things might have been done better, and please don't do it again, kind of thing. Otherwise, yes, indeed.
Chairman, if I may, just in terms of the banking services, which I note was your comments around the framework expiring. Banking services are within my remit as part of the technical finance area. We commissioned the banking services and ended up with a change in banking supplier back in 2017. And that caused an inordinate amount of work in terms of, as you can imagine, in changing banking systems, banking providers, in changing every single system pretty much within the council that has to deal with banking income and payment. The framework that we used was an ESPO framework, and it was the central government framework that had no applicants to be on the framework to supply corporate banking services to local authorities. So our choice was to either create our own banking contract to go out for retender, or to seek a waiver to extend the existing banking contract for a further 3 years, whilst we built our resilience to be able to consider a potential change in banking suppliers at the time. And given particularly the resource allocations to COVID and the challenges that a lot of the COVID grant payments caused, we really didn't think it was worth, or it was possible at this time to actually consider refinancing our banking system. So that was why that one went through.
Thank you. It's just the juxtaposition of the two, maybe that those thoughts come to mind, particularly as to how those things. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Page 62. It's a page of regeneration. Everything seems to be attributed to regeneration, and I've looked at the bottom of that page. Community Action Isle of Wight, community-led housing. The contract was originally tendered in the open market, etc., etc., etc. Regeneration. One would have wondered whether our homelessness department would be involved in that rather than regeneration, because, to be quite honest, and indeed our housing as a whole, it seems we're putting everything into regeneration, including vaccination centres, etc., when really what we should be doing is quantifying it in the correct way and putting it under its own heading. I'm concerned that regeneration, if there's £1 million, £1 million of grant monies for local housing schemes. Now, being the cabinet member who's got a portion to homelessness as part of my remit, I would like to see that and get sight of that within the homelessness budget, so that we can actually tackle the root causes and deal with homelessness, as opposed to ticking a box in regeneration. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do you wish to respond?
Only just to try and clarify here, I think the purpose of the detail here, Councillor Stevens, is where the initiating request came from in terms of the waiver request. So it may well be there may well be involvement with directorates or services in terms of the delivery of these projects, but the regeneration team will be the directorate who's responsible for the commissioning and procurement activity that goes alongside these ones. That's why I assume that's why they would be there.
Thank you, colleagues. Councillor Lilly.
Thank you for. Overall, I feel it might be, because this is quite a big area, and I think that we can really get sort of bogged down. I do think perhaps it's something that should look at in the work plan, and perhaps focus in the future on certain areas. It's a bit like, in a big organisation, sometimes you just got to take a particular test case or a particular area to actually look at it. And I think we need to sort of consider that, because I think today, in this case, it's very difficult to home in. The areas that concern me within the this strategy and procurement is when, for example, on page 61, the floating bridge, right? Where you say a specialist supplier was engaged to carry out, right? One quote was obtained, right? It goes very narrow. And you start to actually worry about anybody involved in the floating bridge, because of obviously, it's out of action and side. And also, if you take, the big area of residential education and placement, again, a lot of cases, our children's services have no choice. They literally have a gun to their head from a particular supplier within that. And there's a huge amount of examples that within the children's services. It's the same, I think, in some of the, the comments on adult social care and other areas. And it worries me that actually there isn't a market out there for some of the service we need, and we're very reliant on one choice, and that might not be the best choice or get the quality of service. And I think the island, this is a real problem for the island. I mean, please, because, getting your people across the water, in our children's services, a lot of children have to go over to the mainland because there isn't a provision on the island. And it's the same in other areas. So could we look at putting this in the work plan and actually looking at how we could work with officers to focus on specific areas, that if we looked at one, then that could give us some learning into other areas, right? But there is, for me, a lot of question marks there.
The answer from the chair is yes, because as you know, I'm very keen on work plans that structure what we're doing. So I'm sure you'll assist me on doing that. Councillor Bacon.
Time is cracking on. Just at the top of page 63, I think that needs to be amended where it refers to a division of responsibilities within cabinet posts that ended, I think, in 2019 or 20. There's no one now. It's waste procurement and major projects. Page 63, the top right-hand box, where it says in 2017 the leader of the council designated a councillor. That situation has long changed. But the main one I wanted to mention is just in relation to paragraph 35, which talks about carbon emissions. I'm not sure if the commentary in the second part, sorry, in paragraph 36 is the answer for this, but I did expect to see more in the report about how the procurement strategy is supporting us going as carbon neutral as possible. As I think, it's essential. It's part of the direction we're going in. I know we haven't formally adopted the new carbon strategy, but we'll be doing shortly. And I just really would want to see this report dealing in much more detail with that, because it is part of the procurement process already. But as I say, if paragraph 36 is saying we're doing that, then great. But
you want to know a bit more of the detail?
I want to see the detail.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I'll certainly pass that on to Hayley for inclusion in the next report.
Otherwise, colleagues, if there are no further questions, we're just asked to note the report. I take it that we have noted it. Thank you. The next report is the Treasury Management Annual Report. Do you want to say anything briefly to this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very briefly. This is the annual report on Treasury Management activities for the year ended 31st of March 2021, presented in accordance with the Treasury Management Strategy. Continuing low interest rates throughout the year have meant there's been a positive contribution to the Council's budget through interest rate savings over the last 12 months. I would draw members' attention to paragraphs 4 and 5 of the covering report on page 183, two areas of minor non-compliance to report, both due to having too much money, unfortunately, arising from the receipt of government COVID grants in advance of expenditure and having to exceed the limits within that we place our deposits with an individual organisation. Those areas were discussed with the Director of Finance before they happened and approval was given. I'd also like to, referring to Councillor Lilly's question earlier about borrowing and the impact of COVID on borrowing, table 2 on page 193 shows that over the last 12 months, the net borrowing position has decreased. So we've got less money borrowed from other external parties than we had at the beginning of the last financial year, principally due to using our surplus cash resources to pay off some of our short-term borrowing and not replacing some of our long-term borrowing. And also on page 198, table 6 shows that there was a saving on interest costs of £1 million against the budget, so contributing to the council's bottom line. I believe those savings were more significant than that, but I think the budget was reallocated earlier in the financial year. So we are doing our best to review any need for borrowing and are taking advantage of short-term interest rates being very low at the moment. Very happy to take any questions from members at this point.
Councillor Lilly.
Very quickly, because I realise our time. On the borrowing, we still have quite a lot of historic loans, which might be at 6 or 7%. Has there been any moves from the government to help in trying to renegotiate those? Because it seems to be a bit bizarre that we're still paying that level of rates when in fact other borrowing is very low.
Through you, Chairman, thank you. Yes, we are very much aware of our historic borrowing and the fact that it is costing us quite a lot of money. Conversely, I guess, government have made it more difficult to repay long-term loans early by increasing the repayment premium. It used to be quite simple to be able to say, we've got a 4.5% loan, we want to repay it, we'll pay a balance of interest premium effectively. But that premium rate went up a couple of years ago, so it's actually punitive now to try and repay government borrowing early. So we are looking at it on a regular basis, but it's just not affordable to pay off the long-term loans that we've got with higher interest rates and replace them with shorter borrowing. It's not affordable.
Councillor Bacon.
It's possibly related to that. I was just going to ask about the paragraph at the top of page 167, which refers to 31 million of loans being allowed to mature. I just wondered what the net overall benefit effect, whichever it is, of those actions has proved to be.
I'm sorry, Councillor Bacon, what page were you on, sorry?
167.
167, forgive me. That's the trouble with being online. I can't simply just turn to the page. Page 167.
It's under table 3.
Table 3, of course.
Borrowing strategy, table 3, and then it's a paragraph that begins in keeping with these objectives.
Different page number. Table 3. I beg your pardon.
I think your numbering may be different.
I think my numbering is different, yes.
Unfortunately, the individual report isn't numbered itself.
Okay.
Appendix 1.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Yes. Effectively the maturing loans are generally of a higher interest rate. So where we're I couldn't tell you exactly the amount that we saved or the amount of interest that we're not paying anymore, but I will find that out for you, Councillor Bacon, and circulate that after the meeting.
That's great. Any other questions on this, given the time as well? Obviously, anything that are questions, they can be taken up through the officer if need be.
Absolutely. Do drop me an email or anything if there are any further questions.
Otherwise, we will note this report. It's here for noting, isn't it? So it is noted. Colleagues, we've probably got about 7 minutes before I have to ask for an extension on this meeting. The next item is important, the annual governance statement, but if we...
Councillor, we made a decision at full council that the meeting cannot go beyond 3 hours.
No committee meeting can go beyond
3 hours, I'm sure that is.
Full council may not.
Full council decided that.
Committee, only full council. Only full council's committee.
Okay.
Yes. Wrongly, as I think, but, as you know, but otherwise we may need an extension if you talk to see what we can do. So the next item is the annual governance statement. Hopefully you want to briefly introduce this?
I will very briefly introduce it. Again, this is a report of the Assistant Chief Executive, so forgive me if I'm not able to answer all the questions. But as you'll see, the report provides you with an overview of the statutory requirements to undertake an annual review. This is the initial draft for your consideration. The final version won't get signed off until September alongside the annual accounts. The aim obviously is to identify any weaknesses in the internal controls and what actions are necessary to provide remedy. So Appendix 1 is perhaps the key document. That is the statement for 2020-21. It provides the outcome of a self-assessment that has been completed with the assistance of the Internal Audit Service. And that takes into account a whole range of things that helps us to make assessment, including things like matters arising from scrutiny, internal reports, audits, complaints, freedom of information requests, data protection, etc., etc. So page 221 provides you with progress that's been made against the 1920 plan, and page 223 provides you with the action plan for the coming year.
Thank you for that. I think that we're again working on slightly different page numbers, so but I'm sure we can identify what you've just said in terms of action plan and progress, whatever. We do get a final bite at this, don't we, at our next meeting. What I'm just going to pick out 2 or 3 things I want to highlight. Under Principle 2, I don't think it properly reflects the difficulties of making a complaint to the authority. I'm not sure that the work of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee on the complaints process has properly been worked all the way through yet on that. So I think there should be a more candid reflection that there's still work to be done on the complaints process. Similarly, I think there should be a more candid acknowledgement that the website is weak at the moment and that there is a problem with that project to deliver a more fit for purpose one. There are a couple of places where the references are wrong in terms of there being policy and scrutiny panels. They are not, they are committees, and indeed their names aren't quite right in stuff, but I can bring that back up. And I think that's it from what I had at the moment. Just some technical things with references to silver and gold commands. There's no discussion of what that actually means. So any outside reader will need some primer on that. And finally, wherever, and it may not be this particular report, but wherever there is an acronym, wherever possible, don't use acronyms. I know it takes more typing, but if anybody's coming to look at how this document works, it's easier to understand if we have the whole explanation. We have about 2 minutes before I need permission to extend for 5. Councillor Lilly.
Well, quickly on this, can I just clarify that we could actually agree this in the next meeting?
The final sign-off is for the September committee. Obviously, your feedback at this point in time is so that we can reflect anything that the committee wishes to add to it as part of the preparation for that final sign-off.
Can I make a suggestion
that we do it at
40 members put information to yourself in
Yes, so I'd suggest we perhaps do that through you, Chairman, so we're not all saying the same thing, bombarding on it.
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot more to be done on this. So at this stage, we're not essentially sort of like approving the content, but we're not necessarily disapproving in great principle to the content. The content is overwhelmingly approvable, and we'll do this at our next meeting. Which means we have one final item on the agenda, members' question time. Does any member wish to try to get a 30-second question in? Councillor Lilly.
No question, but I think it's important that we do have attendance on this meeting, and it's disappointing that 3 of our members are not here. I know that they've probably been substituted as well. We do have substitutes now. So I'd just like to actually raise that.
I will take that up through both democratic services and directly with the leader of the group in question to see why that was the case. But otherwise, thank you for your attendance. I close the meeting formally at 12:59 by my watch, which is the truth. But thank you for your attendance. Thank you, Louise, as well, for your attendance as well. My aim as chair will be to liaise with all members, attending and non-attending as of today, but to make sure that we work together as a team, work out exactly what it is that audit does that complements scrutiny, complements cabinet's work. The one thing I'm going to be very keen on is a work plan to guide us through things. So go and have your lunches. Thank you very much.